Could Washington secondary be the strength of the team in 2024?
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes for Inside the Huskies of Fan Nation Sports Illustrated. I'm the site editor over with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today, and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. So, Lars, I think that Washington secondary is going to be pretty good in 2024. We look at some transfers like Ephesians Prysock, look at some of the guys, and Jordan Shaw. We look at some of the returners that are in this room, and this is shaping up to be a pretty good defense moving forward, especially under defensive coordinator Steve Belichick. So we're going to be continuing with our grades that we handed out for the offensive side on our Wednesday show. So we're going to be doing two grades. We're going to do a short-term grade for 2024 at the start, and then we're going to do a long-term grade for each position on the defensive side at the end. So I'll hand it off to you. What do you think this cornerback group specifically is going to look like in 2024 for the Huskies?
So I like, again, even without Tacario Davis, because he hasn't transferred in, even though he's still in the portal and could still come in April and things like that. We're just going to talk about the guys that are currently for sure coming in, which is, first of all, Ephesians Prysock on his own, I think is significant enough. Almost like Jabbar Muhammad. Like, I think that's one to me where I'm like, you don't necessarily need, and again, the reason why I say that, and I'll get to the grade here in a second, is because of John Richardson. And the coaching, I think the coaching will outweigh not needing to bring both. I think that's a key distinction here, because you do have Elijah Jackson, who both Jedd Fisch and a number of other coaches have mentioned saying, hey, when Jedd Fisch first came in, he was one of the first guys in his office, along with Carson Bruner and others, that said, hey, I really want to be here. Here's what I want to know. Here's X, Y, and Z. Like, basically showing, hey, I know you're new. I want to be here. Like, I am not going anywhere. I want to stay and work with John Richardson and his coaching staff and play for Jedd Fisch. So I think the ability that we saw what Elijah Jackson could do at the back end of last season, and then early in the season we saw what Davon Banks can do. I think getting both those guys back with John Richardson, I'm going to put it at a B+, but with the caveat that I think it could become an A or even an A+ group in terms of how they play out in the season. I'm just going to say going into the season, because Davon Banks is coming off an injury, because Elijah Jackson, again, look promising, right? But I think maybe didn't necessarily have all the coaching that he needed to truly excel as a number 2 cornerback. He can do that opposite Ephesians Prysock. So I think with John Richardson and everything that I've spoken about, I'm going to say B+ going into spring camp, but I think this group is going to be an A or A+ at the end of the season.
So I've got 2 A's here, where I've got an A for right now and an A for the long term, where it's everything you said, where when I look at it, it's the potential. Davon Banks is really nice. Of course, Ephesians Prysock. I really like what Jordan Shaw could bring. And we'll get to the safeties in a second too, because they definitely deserve to be a part of this discussion. But the cornerbacks really just seem to be what might anchor this defense. And we'll get to the edge rushers as well, where that's going to be a big part of this as well. But even when we look at it, like, let's say you never want to plan for it, but it's something that always happens. Let's say Davon Banks has to go down again, or Elijah Jackson needs to miss some time, or Ephesians Prysock does as well. When you look at the guys behind them and you look at the Curly Reeds, the Leroy Bryants, the Caleb Presleys, you look at that group and you say, oh yeah, no, this is really, really solid. I like what this is a lot. And that's kind of what contributes to both grades for me, where those guys are going to be here for a while. We really like what they've developed into so far, even though we haven't really seen them on the field. We've heard a lot of good things about them from the coaching staff, especially from the old one. Jabbar Muhammad spoke really highly of a lot of those guys when he was still around too. So it looks like the position is in good hands for a while. You talk about John Richardson, and then you just look at the youth, and then you look at the recruiting side of things too. And everything just seems to be trending in the right direction at cornerback. And I feel like you could say the same at safety as well.
Exactly. Well, I mean, I think that safety is kind of where long-term, I do think it still can play out, but I think having Kamren Fabiculanen come back it's a massive win, right? Because it's somebody Vinnie Sunseri can work with and say, hey, Asa Turner's now gone. Who's our kind of leader? And Cam Fab, let's be honest, kind of the safety group, you could argue Dom Hampton in a different role, but I think Cam Fab clearly was the best safety on the team last year. I think that's a pretty safe assessment, just in terms of when you look at his ability at the high end, right? Because there was that middle point in the season where Cam Fab really was kind of carrying the secondary. Like he wasn't maybe making all the interceptions or plays or things like that, but he was doing all the little things. And you saw it in the Sugar Bowl, or no, Pac-12 championship, right? Where Cam Fab early on makes that big play that on third down, a couple of others in the first half that really kind of set the tone defensively. You need that coming back because we look at who's next to him, probably McAllister, right?
Right, or Tristan Dunn are probably going to be the two answers.
But that to me, that's where you look at cornerback. I mean, I'm more confident in Ephesians Prysock and Elijah Jackson than I am in Kamren Fabiculanen and the rotating guy next to him. So I think that's where at the end of after spring going into fall camp, maybe they add a veteran safety from the portal next to Cam Fab. Just as maybe hey, I know we've discussed it on the show, but just in terms of that's what would make me a little more confident in the group, just knowing, hey, there's another veteran guy. Because if Cam Fab goes down, now you're looking at Esteen, who's got a couple of timely interceptions, but hasn't truly found a consistent role in the at safety. And then Tristan Dunn, who was a big talking point of Chuck Morrell and the defensive staff last spring, and then turned out to be a great special teams guy, but didn't really do much at safety. So I think having that true second safety will make Cam Fab's life easier, and also just in general kind of shores up the secondary. Because I think when you look at cornerback, there's the depth and everything, both short and long term. But when you look at safety, it's like, okay, I like what it does project to, but I would love to see one more body in that. Just because, again, if you go into camp and McAllister balls out and maybe you don't think that you need a second corner, then fine. But I'm just saying, at least for right now, I would look at that room and say, okay, there's one more proven safety that could be helpful here.
So what grade would you put on this group for right now for 2024?
B- to a B. It's good. It's solid. I'm more or less thinking it's more of a B plus, potentially A-, depending on, maybe who they get in 2025. We've named, Antoine Figgins and a number of other guys that could come in the future that, certainly would give that room a lot of optimism moving forward after Cam Fab and the upperclassmen leave. So I think I would say B- right now, and then B plus, potentially A-, depending on how the 25 class shakes out.
So I've got a solid B right now, where obviously, as you said, Cam Fab is going to be a big part of this. And then McAllister, Tristan Dunn. I think that Tristan Dunn is one guy who's primed to take a big step forward this season. And, we've seen his flexibility. I think that he's somebody who could step into that Ace Eternal role, and he can just fill a lot of holes, especially if he continue to add weight and add strength, that he could be a big time player in the secondary. And then, as you said, we've seen McAllister be really timely with some of the turnovers he's been able to generate. But then, so that's why I have a B right now, where I think it's going to be really solid. I think Vinnie Sunseri is a great guy to help coach that group from his time in the NFL, from his time in Alabama. So that's going to be really helpful as well. But then I've got an A also for this group moving forward, because you just look at all the depth, you look at the potential there, where, again, recruiting does play a small factor in that. When getting a visit from Antoine Figgins is really nice, and we'll see who else they might be able to, get on campus or potentially be interested at the position. Like we saw Adonis Curry, who probably is going to end up playing corner, but we saw him lock in an official visit to Washington as well. But let's look at a lot of the other young guys in the room. We like Raheem Wright. He's a little bit underrated as a prospect. Rashawn Clark is another really nice prospect that they got, another 4-star in-state guy who we've talked about as somebody who could potentially step in and make an impact as a true freshman. And then you could say the same thing about Paul Menke and Peyton Waters, where Menke needs to add a little bit of weight. Peyton Waters is, a promising player, another 4-star recruit. Both him and Menke were. So you look at all the depth and all the potential that's there, and you can't help but be excited about what the secondary could have moving forward. And that's why I've got him with such a high grade moving on, because it feels like there's a whole lot to like in that room, and that between Steve Belichick, Vinnie Sunseri, and John Richardson, that there's just a lot to be excited about at that position. And with that being said, let's move up to the front and get into the edge rushers. Right after a message from our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. For all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. So, Lars, let's jump into the edge rushers a little bit, because this is another group that I really like. I think that I've got them at like a B- right now, where it's chock full of potential, where everybody that you look at Zach Durfee, Voi Tunuufi, where Voi Tunuufi is probably, he's the one with the most snaps under his belt of these guys. And then you can get into the Lance Holtzclaws, Maurice Himes, Russell Davis, Isaiah Ward, where that's a really nice group. You look at that and you say, that's really nice. And then you can even get further into Anthony James as well. But you look at that group right there and you say, there's a whole lot of potential here, but it's time for some of these guys to step up. And I wouldn't be surprised if, Maurice Himes is somebody who's asked to maybe not play a huge role as a pass rusher this year, but maybe step up and be that true run stuffing end where, he's got the body type to maybe bulk up to somewhere around 260, 265 and just be that true edge setter on one side for somebody like Lance Holtzclaw or Isaiah Ward on the other. And then obviously, we've talked about Zach Durfee a lot, and he alone is somebody who we feel like can be a game changer, but he's going to need a lot of help, and we still haven't seen him do that. So that's why I want to temper my expectations a little bit with that group. But this is another one that I'm really, really excited about the long term of.
Yeah, I'm right there with you for that exact reason, because you look at the room and there's no question depth. There's no question a lot of ability. There's a lot of potential sacks to be had, right? You hit the nail on the head with that word, right? This group could say have what's a good conservative if everybody achieved their realistic potential? What are we saying? Plus or over under 27.5 sacks for the group.
For the edge rusher group, I'd say under.
Okay, so
but I would say that's a good number. It's right around that range.
Okay, so with that being said, so if you can get that type of production from just that group, right? Because hopefully you'll want to get some interior pressure and linebackers, maybe a couple of safety sacks, things like that.
Exactly, yeah.
But you want the bulk of your sacks, again, probably coming from your front four, right? Especially your edge rusher. So with that being said, I agree that it's a B- because there's Lance Holtzclaw. There's a number of different body types, which I think is also important because they're all kind of somewhat similar, but there's enough difference in them where Lance Holtzclaw and Maurice Himes are not the same too. Russell Davis and Anthony Ward are not the same too. Although similar, they're not the same. So I think having a different type of guys will allow whichever one succeeds most in the scheme, right? Because now when you bring in an NFL scheme with Steve Belichick, okay, maybe it's not as tailored towards one guy or another, but that guy can do Y instead of X. So it allows, these guys are all versatile, so there's a number of things you can do with them. Even Voi Tunuufi, we've seen him start inside and now go outside. He mentioned having a good relationship with Jason Kaufusi when I talked to him last month. So I have imagining with the scheme that's set up and Jason Kaufusi coaching some of these guys, I think that's another kind of key distinction, right? Not to tip the hat and maybe who we'll be talking about later this week, but having a true defensive line coach, where last year you had Anoke Brechterfield and Eric Schmidt, who it was like a 2-2, right? It was a 2-2-2-2, right? Versus, hey, how about, yes, you can have a multiple defensive front, but just have one coach coaching all those guys. Like we saw what Eric Schmidt was able to do with the special team. So like clearly he knew what he was doing. And so it's a matter of, can Jason Kaufusi max out all these guys, not just at edge rusher, but a lot, because again, we're going to talk about the defensive tackles and other couple of positions in the next segment, but specifically with the edge rushers, can he get all those different type of body types to work? That's the thing. What I'm going to be intrigued to see what happens in fall camp or in spring ball, because I'm sure it can, but I'm just curious to see how does it look.
I get where you're coming from there, and I do agree, because it's really just a matter of finding a way to live up to the potential, and that's where I'm really excited about this group. Where going forward, I have it at a B+, where I know that giving out a couple of A's, where there's not the same long term. Where when you just look at the eligibility with some of these guys, where Anthony James has all 4 years, but Russell Davis, Isaiah Ward, Lance Holtzclaw, Maurice Himes, they don't necessarily all have 3-4 years remaining. So there's still some work to be done But you look at 2024, you look at 2025, and you say, all right, yeah, these are some guys who can definitely be some nice building blocks for this team in the short term. And it's still really exciting to know that you have a lot of these guys for multiple years, because Lance Holtzclaw looks like somebody who's going to take a big jump forward. We saw him really perform well in fall camp this last year. And as he continues to add weight, it feels like he's starting to get ready for that bigger role. And I don't know, I just feel like we're going to see some really inventive packages from Steve Belichick when it comes to how he's going to deploy these guys. And just from what you watch on the film when he's with the New England Patriots, just the way that they deployed some of their edge rushers and the way that they just asked them to do different things and the way they asked them to line up and show one thing pre-snap and do another thing post-snap, where, especially when you talk about the body types, they have the body types that are able to do that. It's not a bunch of guys that, where you look at a Braylon Trice, and I'm not saying Braylon Trice isn't athletic or able to do these other things, but you look at Braylon Trice and you say, yeah, that guy's a pure pass rusher right there. But if you look at somebody like Isaiah Ward, who I'm really high on, I think he's going to be a really nice player, but you look at him, he's long, he's a little bit on the lean side, and you say, oh yeah, I can see that guy dropping back into coverage and playing, will linebacker for a couple of plays and just, throwing the defense off. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's something we see a little bit more of from this defense moving forward.
Right, because at times, to your point, we've seen that, right, with Braylon Trice dropping back and Zion dropping back in coverage. Again, very much in spurts, right? They're not truly going to do that more than probably 5 to 7 times a game. Yeah. I was going to say, so that's certainly under 10. You're never going to see
like 5 is somewhat generous.
Right. I was more or less just making it clear, like, hey, of the 60 snaps they're playing, there's not more than 10 by any stretch of the imagination. But it's still good to do because, again, as an edge rusher in the NFL, you still see that at times where you still, again, if you're coming in as an edge rusher in the NFL or, a pass rusher, outside linebacker, whatever you want to call it, your job is to get sacked, right? So for the most part, you're going to be going after the quarterback or trying to stop the run and things like that. But at times if you're blitzing and your defensive coordinator is a little more extravagant, you do need to have that ability to be able to stay on the field and be competent dropping back in coverage. And so I think, again, you know more about the Patriots defense than I do. But with that being said, I'm curious maybe how much does Steve Belichick play into the players and his personnel, and how much does he want to say, hey, this is the scheme I want to run. Now we just got to get the guys to get to that point. It's, are you going to meet them halfway? Which I imagine it's going to be halfway, right?
It definitely will be. And no, I'm sorry to cut you off because that was something he kind of mentioned on the Greenlight podcast a little bit, where he said, yeah, I'm not going to rubber stamp what I did in New England and take it over here because that's not going to work. It has to be able to work for the players. And just from some of the things that I've heard from some conversations I've had, it does sound like that there's going to be that same level of flexibility. And I think I mentioned this on a previous show, but two guys that, and it doesn't necessarily fit with the edge rushers, but two guys that were asked to do a lot in the Patriots defense that have, from what I've heard, been shown on film a lot are Jelani Tavai, who played inside linebacker, and Jabril Peppers, who played some safety, played some linebacker. And the point that was made to me was when you look at both of those guys and you look at what they do, they would show one thing pre-snap and then drop and have a completely different assignment. So it's really interesting to see because that was one of the things that the Patriots did so well. And it was also one thing that Michigan did really well was it's not necessarily a disguise in terms of what the play call is, but it's creating confusion along the offense. And then to quote Bill Belichick, as I have to do whenever I get the chance, it's just doing your job outside of that, where what your assignment is and you can show whatever it is you're supposed to show. But as long as you drop back, do your job and make the tackle, that's all it's going to be. And it's going to be really interesting with this group of edge rushers because we've seen Matthew Judon do that with the Patriots. We've seen Josh Uche do a little bit of that with the Patriots. And just watching some of these guys that are in the edge rushers room right now, I could see them having similar responsibilities to those guys.
Exactly. And I think because, again, it gets back to the whole point of potential and flexibility. Those are the two most important things that you can, if you don't have a true number one, like a Braylon Trice or a Will Anderson or just some guy that you can point to, it's like, hey, that's our guy. We have a couple other guys too, but that's our guy. That's the guy you got to double and triple team so these other guys can potentially get more sacks. If you don't have that, you have to have versatility. And so at least that's what UW has going into 2024.
And as we talked about with Zach Durfee, that's what you hope he can step into the role of this year. And you and I both believe that he can do that, but it's just a matter of showing it on the field before you can have that same discussion and say, yeah, that's going to be the guy. So what grade do you have for this position group moving forward?
I'd say moving forward, B plus. Again, B plus. Like, it's not bad, but again, to your point, when you start thinking about the future, especially 2025 and beyond, again, the 2025 class is not going to sink or swim in terms of the future.
Sure.
But especially from a recruiting end, you need to at least get a couple guys in that room to say, hey, we're going to develop these guys. We might get a couple more in the portal. We're definitely leaning on these 4 and 5, potentially maybe a 5-star in that mix, just to say, hey, this is our guy.
Right. Now, Lars, let's get into some of the other guys, the defensive tackles, the linebackers, right after a word from a new sponsor. Because we've got to give a shout out to our friends over at Fire TV. Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing TV console that provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live TV, whether it's opening weekend for baseball or the college basketball tournament. You're going to want to have a Fire TV. Fire TV is super cool. It recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. That includes all of us at Locked On and most of the big league pro teams and college conferences as well. Fire TV channels lets you dive into all the game analysis, highlights, and more to keep you update on all the latest in the world of sports, from March Madness, the NBA, the MLB, and lots more. Not to mention great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, cooking videos as well. You can check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. If you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you should. Trust me on this. To learn more, go to www.amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. All right, Lars, let's start with the defensive tackles, where I kind of like what this group looks like in the short term. I'm not so sure about it long term right now, where there are a lot of depth questions there, where right now let's look at the rotation. So I'll give it a B for right now, where Sebastian Valdez looks like he can be a game wrecker. Javon Parker looks like he's going to be a nice piece. We'll see what Armand Parker looks like. And then you look at Bryce Butler, the community college transfer, and Alinius Davis. And that's basically the room right there. So we wouldn't be surprised if you see one more transfer at the position during the spring, but that's why there's a B right now. You like the starters, but there are a lot of questions about the depth, but there's a lot of potential in some of those guys behind him. Oh, and Jacob Bandis as well. Sorry.
Well, see, I was going to say, that's again, because I've written the story on Inside the Huskies. I'm sure you have on USA Today Sportswire, but we've also talked about on the show where I remember, I don't know if you were there for those conversations, but I feel like Jacob Bandis said to you at one point in fall camp last year, especially, that last year was going to be his last year at Washington. And maybe for one reason or another, whether he talked to the new staff and decided that would change your heart, which I'm honestly curious to see what that story is when we get to talk to the players in April, because I swear I remember Jacob saying, this is likely probably my last year here. Maybe
I remember him saying that as well. Yeah.
I was going to say, so I'm not crazy for thinking that. So I do think that is a sneaky kind of important depth veteran guy returning, because when you bring in Sebastian Valdez from an FCS level, okay, again, same thing with Zach Durfee, right? Where we've seen it. We've seen at that level he can succeed and do it. And in Sebastian Valdez's case, do it on a consistent year in and year out basis. Does that translate, and does it translate as well to the Big Ten level and the Power 5 level? That's always the unproven question. So getting a true body who played in number of positions and a number of snaps over the past couple of seasons, I think that, again, whether he's not going to be your 4, 5, 6, 7 sack a guy, right? That's not Jacob Bandis' role and style. But I think just having that veteran presence, I still think they should probably get a younger, maybe like a redshirt freshman or sophomore transfer in the portal. Because again, looking at that future down the road, to your point, I think it's an absolute B room, maybe even a B plus, depending on after spring ball, we can reassess. But I'd say B going into spring ball, potentially B plus coming out. But then when you look 25 and even 26, now I'm thinking, again, aside from Javon and Armand Parker, right? Maybe Anthony James develops, but either way, you're still that's the room right there. So you're not seeing much beyond that. So
Alinius Davis as well, because Bryce Butler will have 2 years.
Right, but Alinius Davis, again, also another guy who very few snaps, if any, to be played in his college career at Washington so far. Again, that gets back to my point, even with this class, where it's good, but you still want a number. You want to go probably 5, 6 deep on the interior line that you can kind of just rotate around, and you're halfway there, right? If you got 3, you still need a few more guys to balance out that room.
Like and you never really want to compare things to Oregon because programs are built in such different ways. But with the defensive line class that Oregon brought in, you would like to see Washington do something along those lines, where it's really interesting to see them loading up in the secondary. And moving forward, I wouldn't be surprised to see them start loading up with, that's the interesting thing with this particular class of defensive tackles, is that it's not super strong on the West Coast. So the coaching staff definitely has to reach out of its normal footprint a little bit to go get somebody like Josiah Hammond out of Oklahoma, where they seem to be really, really high on him. Somebody who is still very raw as a football player, but they seem to really like him. He's been posting a lot of stuff about UW on his social media, but that's where, like, right now with this room moving forward, I'm at a C-, where there's a lot to be desired. And there are just a lot of questions to be had where, can you go get Josiah Sharma back from after he decommitted following the coaching change? Like, I don't know, but there just aren't a lot of quality bodies just on this side of the Mississippi right now for this particular cycle, which makes it tough.
Right. But again, to your point, we've also seen Washington go well into the other side, going right of Mississippi and saying, hey, we're going to go into Alabama, we're going to go down to Florida, we're going to go into these other places and offer some of these defensive end and defensive linemen just in general. Because again, to your point, you can't just set, this isn't college basketball. You can just say, okay, well, it's a down year in 25 for the defensive lineman, so we're just going to go in the portal and see who's there in the portal. Like, you can't just earmark it for the portal. You can't just, and especially when it comes to, especially with Jedd Fisch saying, hey, we want to develop guys from the high school level in at least 2-3 years in college, maybe ideally 3 or 4. But ideally, you want those 2-year guys, even as transfers, to say, hey, come in as a redshirt freshman or redshirt sophomore, but then be a redshirt junior and senior, even though, again, ideally, you're hoping your coaching develops them to be a potential draft pick a year later. You ideally want a kind of minimum 2-year in the program just to have some consistency and stability. So that's why I'm with you on the C-. I mean, you can honestly say D+, just because, again,
sure. I like Jason Kaufusi, so I didn't want to be too harsh there. I think he's a really good coach.
Not his fault. It's not Jason Kaufusi.
No, it's not his fault at all. Yeah, I would put some trust into him as whoever's there he can develop.
But I'm saying it's the predecessor that it's on to inherit that. To now he's got to turn this grade from a D+ to a B+, but he's that guy that can do that. So I think that's why Jedd Fisch brings in Jason Kaufusi, because it's like, hey, you know what? This guy can. And I will say, there might be some sleepers on the West Coast, and Jason Kaufusi can find him in Utah and Nevada and parts of Colorado and even Arizona. Like, they will probably find 1 or 2 defensive linemen on the interior defensive linemen on the West Coast in 2025 that are not going to be highly ranked. And it's not a bold prediction, obviously, because again, to your point, the pickings are already slim. But my point is, it's like, if a guy is unranked that commits to Washington in August, September, October,
yeah,
don't be surprised. Don't be surprised. I'm just saying, because it's going to be that type of, and Jason Kaufusi will turn that guy into a multi-year starter because of his ability to coach and develop guys. So I don't think that's necessarily a concern, but I do think, again, it's an uphill battle that he's inheriting, let's just say, because it's not your point. Absolutely. It's not on Jason Kaufusi that the long-term prospects are what they are, because, well, to our point, what we've been saying all along, do not just raid Arizona's roster from freshmen on down and say, hey, you know what, because that's not, you can take some of them, which they absolutely have, but you don't want them just taking guys for the sake of filling a body. And hey, you know what, for spring ball, we need 5 transfer linemen that have never played college football and we have no relationship with. We just need bodies. And they'll transfer out of the year probably.
So let's make sure we spend a little bit of time on the linebackers here before we wrap up. Yep. Where I got a B for it right now, where Carson Bruner, Alfonso Tuputala is a really nice, experienced group of starters. I would be surprised if Carson Bruner becomes an all Big Ten kind of guy this coming season, just with the motor he plays with, his speed. I think that he's going to really solidify this group. But you look behind him, Alfonso Tuputala has been really solid for Washington. But then behind them, you've got 2 former walk-ons that are scholarship guys, in Anthony Ward and Drew Fowler. And then further behind them, it's a whole bunch of young guys in Devin Bryant, Jordan Whitney, and Kamori House. So just because we're going to run out of time here pretty shortly, I'm going to go with a C+ for the future of the position, where, all the top 4 guys are going to be gone within 2 years, just in terms of their eligibility. But when I look behind them, I see a whole lot of potential. I think that Jordan Whitney and Kamori House and Devin Bryant, all three of them, really. I don't want to single anybody out there because they're all really talented. I think they're all really athletic and just do a really good job. Kamori needs to put on some weight before he can just, become a more consistent contributor. But I look at all three of those guys and I see a lot of potential, but it's the same thing where we saw Devin Bryant do a little bit as a true freshman. We didn't see anything from Jordan Whitney. We probably won't see much from Kamori House this season. So it's just a question of, all right, how are these guys going to develop under Robert Bala? And I like what the path they're on. So like C+ long-term feels fair for me.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I'm taking all the Carson Bruner stock right now, buying all of it, the whole thing in the Carson. No slight to Alfonso Tuputala, but just from an overall linebacker ability, what Carson Bruner brings, again, his father probably, DNA doesn't fall far from the tree in that regard. So I'd say B, certainly maybe even a B+, just with the upper, B more respectable because, again, to your point, 2 walk-ons and going back to Chris Peterson's days, he would just be smiling ear to ear at seeing 2 walk-on linebackers in the 2Ds, but that's neither here nor there. Because again, Eddie Edefuano was also a one-time former walk-on linebacker. So again, there's nothing wrong with that. Anthony Ward was also a former. So, but again, to your point, long-term, then you start looking, you only have 3 guys behind them. Okay. But that's also could include Manti Te'oa, right? So if Robert Bala is able to secure him and a few other guys in the 25 class, that C all of a sudden now goes to a B+ A- because looking at those guys, hey, if he's able to secure those guys in the 25 class that we've talked about on previous shows, I feel a whole lot better about the future of that room than I do going into the 25 class as we look at things now.
Absolutely. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the everydayers for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support as we continue to try to give you as much fun content as we can throughout the offseason. If you have any ideas for us, please feel free to leave them down in the YouTube comments. We're going to try to get to as many fun things as we can over the course of this offseason, since we still have about a month before spring practice gets underway. And to make sure you stay involved with the show every day, make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure to subscribe, hit that little bell so you can get the notifications whenever we post a video. Make sure you like the video, leave us a comment down below if you have any questions, comments, concerns, ideas, anything. We're here for all of it. And again, if you're audio only, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it all really does help the show out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you on Friday.